Revelation. Vultures. Big, noisy, circling mechanical vultures. That's what Amy thought of as she saw, for the first time in her life, half a dozen helicopters circling around in the same sky. A couple of them were news choppers. The rest looked like the army. Buzzing, that soft thwopping fading in and out as their blades chopped up the air. If you ever see more than 2 helicopters over you, you can be sure that something terrible has happened. Amy made John take her out to the water tower and the toilets. John went to the one on the far right and opened it, showing her that it was just a toilet, showing her that if he went and stood inside, nothing happened. She made him do this about 20 more times. She suggested he try the other 2. He said that he had done that and that they, too, were just toilets. Amy hated crying. She hated crying more than she hated puking, and she would rather puke on live television than cry in front of John right now. She wasn't a large person under normal circumstances, but when she cried, she could feel herself shrink 2 feet. She instantly got demoted to child, everybody making soothing sounds and apologizing for things they didn't even do. Strangers inviting themselves to put an arm around her shoulder like she was a 5-year-old lost at the bus station. And she was a crier. She cried when people yelled at her. She cried when she got frustrated. She cried during particularly sad commercials. But it was just crying. She didn't get hysterical. She didn't fall apart. But everybody treated her like she did, because her eyes were so quick to start leaking when things went wrong. And now, as John opened the toilet door, and again she saw nothing but blue plastic walls and a whiff of poop chemicals, she felt that hot sting in her tear ducts and knew that they were going to betray her for the 10,000th time. The thwopping got louder, and one of the helicopters seemed to be swooping really low on its passes. It was a huge thing with 2 blades. She could feel their pulsing in her gut. A black semi-truck was turning down the lane, heading right toward them. Watching it warily, John said, "We have to get out of here. We'll regroup and come up with a plan, but if they catch us, then it's over. We can't help him." One more time. John glanced back, toward the truck, and then toward the tiny army men in the distance and the bright orange fence they were stretching across the field, sealing off the town behind them. Tiny shouts from a bullhorn were drifting through the air, yells from angry and scared people, honking horns, all of it playing under the terrible, hollow drumming of the helicopters, the soundtrack of every worst-case scenario. John obeyed. The toilet was just a toilet. You haven't really experienced the full range of human emotion until you've cried your eyes out while hanging on for dear life on the back of a dirt bike bouncing across a cornfield in the freezing cold. Amy and John made it back to the shopping center, which was clearing out fast. They returned the motorcycle to the pickup, propping it up by the tailgate because they couldn't get it lifted up onto the bed. Maybe the owner would think it just fell out. Cars were filing out and heading up the highway, because rumor was spreading around that they were going to expand the quarantine to include the shopping center and everything for a few miles on the other side of it, but who knew if that was true. The Greyhound was boarding, ready to just dump everybody off at the stops where they had been picked up. Amy thought she could get the driver to let John on board. The guy wasn't made of stone, but John thought that would make them too easy to find if that detective came after them. It made sense, and she got her bag and watched the bus lumber down the highway without them. It was the right decision, but they were now stranded. Amy would never be able to eat a Cinnabon again for the rest of her life. They sat there, at the same table she was sitting at when she spotted John an hour earlier. John was on and off his intermediately working phone, first trying friends in town to see if they happened to be outside of city limits when everything went crazy. Those calls wouldn't even go through. Then he tried some people he knew outside of town, but the ones who answered had their own problems. Amy suggested getting a ride to the airport about 10 miles away and renting a car there, but John said he had some things on his driver's record that would ensure he would never be able to rent a car for the rest of his life. Amy didn't have a license, so that shot down that idea. It was just so freaking frustrating. David needed breaking out from a military zombie quarantine, and his saviors couldn't get a ride from Cinnabon. John paused in his phone calls to shove the remaining third of the Cinnabon roll into his mouth when his phone rang. He picked it up and mumbled, "Munch, where are you?" John's friend Munch Lombard had not in fact fled the country in David's truck, as John instructed him, but simply went to his parents' farm outside of town. He promised to come get Amy and John in 15 minutes or so, but John wasn't comfortable waiting at the shopping center that long, so they agreed to meet him at the John Deere dealership a mile up the street. They took off walking. Amy's left foot felt sticky, and she was pretty sure was actively bleeding in her stupid shoes, but she said nothing because broken blisters were unimportant when the world was in crisis. She kept telling herself that over and over again, wincing with every step along the highway. Fewer and fewer cars passed them going north. More and more green trucks passed them going south. She was fairly sure that by sundown, there would be more military personnel encircling Undisclosed than there were people inside of it. All of that between her and David. Soon, John was driving David's Bronco. Munch in the passenger seat, and Amy sitting in the smelly back seat. The truck had stunk of rotten eggs for years for reasons no one could explain. They turned off into a gravel lane snaking into dense woods, the canopy of trees blocking the sun and fast-forwarding the clock to the mid-evening hours. The lane was barely wide enough for one vehicle, and Amy wondered what they did when two vehicles met going opposite directions. Did somebody have to slowly back all the way out? Did they flip a coin to decide who? Amy tuned into the conversation between Munch and John to hear Munch say, "Yeah, they're playing that clip of the reporter's face getting eaten every 5 minutes. What are they saying it is? Some kind of virus. Maybe something the terrorists released. Eats your skin, eats your brains, makes you crazy." Jesus, that's the story they're putting out there to calm people down? That's really worse than just saying zombies. My dad and granddad have been huddled around the TV since it happened. They think it's Revelations, though I can't remember anything that messed up even in the Bible. The face-eating part, I mean. They rounded some trees and came to a closed gate, and behind it sat a shiny black pickup truck. Behind the wheel was a big guy with a dark beard and aviator sunglasses, who Amy thought looked like John Goodman's character in The Big Lebowski. Munch muttered a curse and got out of the Bronco. The guy stepped out of the black pickup, then reached inside and pulled out a shotgun. John got out and Amy followed his lead, thinking that it had taken society all of 2 hours to degenerate to the shotgun stage. To the shotgun guy, John said, "Hey, Daryl." Daryl nodded curtly but didn't answer. Then Munch said, "Come on, Dad, don't embarrass me. Let us through." Shotgun guy, who Amy gathered was Munch's dad, and whose name was Daryl unless John had gotten it wrong, said, "They're from in town, right? They were in the city when the outbreak happened?" John was. She wasn't. That's his friend, Amy. Amy waved. Daryl, Shotgun, said, "Make you a deal. Drive him back to the National Guard checkpoint they set up outside town. Let him check him over and see if they give him a clean bill of health, we'll talk. But until then, he ain't getting past this gate. Him and nobody else. We already had refugees wandering around here, trying to see what they could steal." "Come on, Dad, they're homeless. They can't get back in town. They got nothing. They left everything behind. Don't be a dick." "Don't push me, Michael. We talked about this." John said, "If it makes you feel better, if I was infected, you'd know it. I saw a guy get it right in front of me, and I took hold of him within 1 minute." "Who are you again?" Munch said, "God damn it, Dad, that's John, from the band. You've met him half a dozen times." Daryl nodded and said, "From the band? Of course." John said, "Look, don't let me in. It's fine, but she needs a place to stay, and she was never in town. She was on her way in when they shut down the highway." Amy was about to speak up, but she wasn't staying here with those nut jobs. The place had post-apocalyptic rape cult written all over it. Daryl rendered it moot. "Maybe she wasn't in the city, but she's been with you all day, right?" Munch laughed, shook his head, and said, "Unbelievable. Fucking unbelievable." John said, No, it's fine. I'm not trying to sow discord in your family here. I shouldn't have asked. We'll be on our way." Daryl said, "That's right, you will. And I'm going to tell you the same thing I told everybody else who's come up to this gate. Till a man in uniform comes and gives the all clear, maybe not even then. If you show up here again, you ain't getting the courtesy of a warning shot." The look on John's face said he was wondering if he can get the shotgun away from Daryl and smash in his nose with the stock. Amy was pretty sure John could do it. The guy looked fat and slow, but then John snapped out of it and they headed back to the Bronco. As they did a 3-point turn in the lane to head back onto the chaos, Amy sighed and said, "What now?" "Back to plan A. We head north, put some distance between us and the bullshit. If we get caught, thrown in jail or quarantine, it's over. So for right now, the goal is not to do that." She crossed her arms and blew some dangling hairs out of her eyes and said, "I don't like going farther away from him. David could be hurt or running away or who knows what, and we're just leaving him." John was silent for a moment, and Amy detected that there was something he wasn't telling her. But either he'd tell her or he wouldn't. She learned that she couldn't press John like she could David. Every conversation took place on his terms. John said, "Don't worry, we'll be back, but we're coming back strong. We're coming back to veto all this shit. But we gotta load up first." And Amy thought, he doesn't believe that. The maps and shit. As they drove, instead of the highway, John only saw blood and brains, splattered on a filthy blue plastic door.